Hi, on behalf of Impact Austin, my name is Margaret Von Flatern. I'm COO at FBF Law and Impact Austin member, class of 2019. And I'd like to welcome all of you to Building a Resilient Austin, part of our Discovery Days 2021 series. Before I introduce our moderator and hand the reins over to our distinguished panel, I wanted to tell you a little more about me and my journey with Impact Austin. I attended my first Impact Austin event in 2018. Unlike many of my sisters in membership, my first event was not a coffee with suspiciously little coffee. It was an annual meeting. It was in those first few hours in a lecture hall at the University of Texas that I was drawn to the mission of Impact Austin. The energy and influence of hundreds of women gathering together their collective voice and financial resources to support our community in such an impactful way made a lasting impression on me. While I had previously had a full and busy philanthropic and service-driven part of my life, this was different. You could see in those hours the real effect this organization could have on our community, and I signed up that night. I have had the pleasure to be a Grants Review Committee member these last 2 years and your Discovery Days chair these last few months. And I continue to be in awe of the things this group of talented and passionate women can do when we join voices and forces. I'd like to thank our Discovery Days sponsors who make this event possible, C2C Media and Dochin Realtors. And also thanks to our leadership and philanthropy level sponsors. For those of you who are not aware, Impact Austin is a local collective women's philanthropy group open to any female identifying folks who want to pool their resources to make a bigger impact in our community. To date, one member at a time, we have donated over $7.44 million to Central Texas nonprofits. Thank you to our past and current members. We hope many of you will join us. Check out Impact Austin for membership details, or just ask me. If cost is a barrier and you're interested in being involved, please reach out to us. We'll find a way to make it happen. Reminder, you can use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and we will answer them at the end of the session. We are recording today's session, and the video will be available on our Discovery Days webpage in the coming days. And now, let me introduce you to our moderator for today's session. Estevan Delgado is a social justice advocate and policy professional dedicated to securing racial equity for our Latinx communities. The son of auto workers, Estevan grew up in Middle Tennessee and is a first-generation college graduate from Rice University. Eager to explore a career in healthcare out of college, Estevan spent his time before graduate school working in quality and process improvement for community health clinics and nonprofit hospitals. After becoming increasingly aware that only so much can be done for Black and Brown families when we focus on people's immediate health needs and not the conditions that cause them, Estevan personally saw a need to pivot to a career in public policy and dreamed of pursuing a career in DC. However, Estevan's time at the LBJ School of Public Affairs culminated with the 2016 election, increased and open hostility towards immigrant families and people of color in the South and in our communities, bringing the fight back home for Estevan. In his current role at the Austin Community Foundation, Estevan oversees the operations of the Hispanic Impact Fund, which supports the economic security and advancement of Hispanic Central Texans through building race-forward community partnerships and collective impact investing. Estevan, thank you for all that you do for our community, and thank you for sharing your time and talents with us today.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for having me, Margaret. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you and with everyone else on this panel and with everyone that is here viewing this webinar today. I cannot be more honored to be sharing space with you. Thank you for that warm introduction. You know, when I think about building resilient communities, I think it really harkens back to the time that we're living in. You know, there's a term that I was reading yesterday on Facebook, this glazed over effect, right? And it's something that I think many of us are have bought into, right? There's been so much going on in our world today that it's easy, you know, as we're trying to stay at home and do our part to get through the pandemic, just to be like, okay, whatever's happening in the world, we'll deal with it tomorrow. But in reality, we can't do that. This is a moment that we need to seize upon, and that we need to be, you know, we need to actively work together to get through, because there are so many things being magnified in this moment, right? That we need to actively fight, right? So that we can move forward, not only as a community, but as a nation, right? Because there are so many interlocking puzzle pieces. And as we think about this word resilience, right? Being a resilient community, being a resilient Austin, there's so much to unpack there. Because as we think of the word resilient, what are we really trying to say? Normally, when we think of the word resiliency, we think about how do we make Black and Brown communities resilient? And when we say that, we're ultimately asking, how do we ensure Black and Brown communities bounce back? And when we say that, what we're really asking is, how do we ensure that poor communities, don't keep on going through the same cycles that they go through time and time again? Because we know that the way that the systems are built to ensure that Black and Brown communities consistently bear the brunt, right, of each and everything in our society that's thrown at them, right? And so the real question becomes, how do we really design a society where Black and Brown communities don't have to, right, consistently be, right, the net, right, for the whole community, right? So that we don't consistently have to be the fence, the catchment, right, for, right, the whole community. What does this become? You know, when I talk to our investors in the Hispanic Impact Fund, you know, I tell them, you know, we're 35% of the Central Texas community, and yet we account for 50% of, you know, the deaths and the hospitalizations from COVID-19. Why is that? You know, why is that? And it's not because, you know, Latinos are out partying all the time. No, it's because society says that Latinos and Latino immigrants, you know, deserve, you know, the low paying wage jobs and public spaces that keep our economy going in this time. That's what we deserve right now. You know, we deserve the jobs that put our health and safety against our economic security. Opportunities that don't allow us to be resilient. That's what it means right now. And so, in a time when our government hasn't been doing what it needs to do to ensure the resiliency of our community, we've really had to depend on our nonprofit leaders, our nonprofit organizations, to get our families, you know, what they need, you know, and those needs are urgent, and those needs are evolving each and every day. Seems like every other day this pandemic has thrown another curveball at our communities that we've had to solve. And we have amazing nonprofit leaders and experts that have been solving these things day in and day out. And I am joined by 4 of them today that I'm so excited to share this space with, to introduce you to, and to join in conversation today. And we are going to get to them in just a moment. And so I'm excited to introduce them to you. And as part of this conversation, I'm hoping that we can really dig into, one, what they've learned being on the ground, what kind of stories they can share with you, and two, how you can get involved, how you can get past that glazed over effect, how you can get past all of that noise, and how you can get involved and help really truly build that next iteration of Austin, that next iteration of your home, that city that you live in, so that you can give back. So I'd like to introduce you first to Dan Leal. Dan became Seedling's executive director in August of 2017. And over the past 20 years has been a nonprofit manager with great experience. Dan helped the board of directors over at Seedling develop a strategic plan that will continue to grow the number of mentored children impacted by parental incarceration and to increase the depth of service and resources for children of incarcerated parents. Dan also previously chaired as was previously the chair of One Voice Central Texas, a membership organization of over 120 nonprofit executives and organizations that seeks to support executive directors and increase local resources for health and human services nonprofits. So welcome, Dan. We
Thank you.
are also joined by Carmen Yanes Pulido, who is a native of Austin, Texas, which is a rare breed, which I'm sure Carmen will tell you. She is a second generation community organizer, and she is also the founding executive director of Go Austin, Vamos Austin, also known as GAVA, and has worked with neighborhoods and organizations in Austin's Eastern Crescent for the last 15 years. Carmen cares deeply about the community relationships and intergenerational organizations in our community and participates in public health and anti-racist, anti-displacement networks in Central Texas and across the country. So welcome, Carmen. Next, we would also like to welcome Nakinia Wilson. She is a native of Fort Worth, Texas, and has lived in the Austin area for over 20 years. Currently, Nakinia serves as the Vice President of Institutional Advancement at Huston-Tillotson University, Austin's oldest institution of higher education and the only historically Black university. Prior to her leadership role at Huston-Tillotson, Ms. Wilson served as the first full-time director of Black Mamas ATX, a local nonprofit working to ensure that Black women survive and thrive before, during, and after childbirth. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Raul Alvarez, who is the executive director of the Community Advancement Network, or CAN. He's been over there since 2015. Raul was also an Austin City Council member from 2000 to 2006. He was the City Council representative on CAN's board during that time, becoming the chair in 2004. After serving on the City Council, Raul was elected to serve on the ACC Board of Trustees. He also has served on the Capital Metro Board, on the Electric Utility Commission, and has served as the chair of the Early Childhood Council. Prior to CAN, Raul worked for AISD as an administrative supervisor in the Office of Teaching and Learning. So welcome, Raul. So thank you so much, everyone. You all are amazing leaders in your own right, and I'm so excited to dig into conversation with each of you. I want to start with Dan, and Dan, if you'll take a couple of moments, to tell us a bit more about Seedling, and to tell us, through your work with the organization, what has been magnified, over for your constituency, and what help is needed over there. What can you tell us?
Thank you so much, Esteban, and thank you, Impact Austin, for having us. And I'm just really honored, truly, to be on this panel with such amazing people. And so Seedling Foundation exists to support children challenged by parental incarceration. And we do that through the care of a dedicated mentor to make a difference in the life of a child. Seedling mentors last year over 650 children in several school districts here in Central Texas, and just proud to be there. And what we've seen, Esteban and Impact Austin, is that our families are overwhelmed. Our schools are overwhelmed. Our school employees are overwhelmed because of the pandemic. Low-income families are going through so much, and just the basic needs in our community are such a priority. And being connected, school connectedness, is very difficult for low-income families. And so Seedling has really stepped up and done innovative things to reconnect the children with their mentors. And what I'm really excited about is that The families have seen just how much their mentors and seedling cares about their kids, and that's been huge. And as far as the need goes, we need more people pouring into the lives of children. Whether it's this school year or next school year, we need more people to invest in lifting up children who have an incarcerated parent. And of course, all nonprofits, as I'm also involved with One Voice Central Texas, we need resources, we need donations, and we need people to step up and even get out of their comfort zones to come and volunteer with nonprofit organizations.
Thank you for that. For those that might be new to the kind of topic of children with incarcerated parents, what as a primer, kind of what would you want them to kind of know about this, especially during the time of the pandemic?
Oh, thank you for asking that, because children who have an incarcerated parent have had what's called an adverse childhood experience with the parental incarceration. That's enough, right? That a child is going through that because of mass incarceration in our country. But children who have an incarcerated parent, on a scale of 0 to 10, have about 4 adverse childhood experiences in their lifetime, whereas other kids who do not have an incarcerated parent average 0.7. So this is 5 times more. And I would say, Esteban, that there is an 11th adverse childhood experience. And, that is the pandemic. And also the social injustices wrapped around that have been adverse childhood experience number 11. And they say that 4 is the tipping point. So our kids are in danger of being over the tipping point.
What does that tipping point do for a child that's in one of these kind of scenarios?
Well, one immediate concern is their childhood mental health. And what that looks like without intervention as it goes into their childhood. We are all adults, and many of us have been through things as kids. And we, as we become older, come to the realization that those things that we've been through as kids affect us into adulthood. Our physical health, our emotional health. But for children who have an incarcerated parent, if they don't have someone to talk with or process with, it can really manifest itself into some severe issues. And we never want to put our kids in a box and say that they're going to go to prison or anything like that. We don't do that. That's not a truth. But the truth is if you're going through a lot of stuff, there's more of a high possibility of turning to drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. And because of the mass incarceration, that can possibly mean that a child who, as they become adult, could have interaction with the criminal justice system that we don't want.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. I look forward to talking a little bit more about that as we kind of get into group discussion. I want to turn things over now to Carmen. Carmen, kind of same question over to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about GAVA and what has been magnified for you and the community members that you and your organization serve, and what's needed at this moment?
I think what's become extremely clear is just how important the long game is in terms of supporting community stability, community networks, building community power. There are a million ways that the long-term work, even just over the past 7 years in terms of relationship building in these neighborhoods that are disproportionately impacted by so many health inequities, as well as all these institutions, was really instrumental in us being able to move 90% remote and continue to do the same kind of work and actually accelerate it. So we had been working on strategies around community access to healthy food and safe physical activity and green spaces, also taking on some of the more serious threats to neighborhood stability, like displacement and like flooding and other climate shocks and stressors that also disproportionately impact our folks. And so a lot of that work just got accelerated. We were looking at ways for the community to really generate and own their own produce distribution program. And that got accelerated in the beginning of the pandemic when all of a sudden there was a huge need and a shortage of fresh produce. And that produce was donated for 3 weeks. And by the 4th week, it was a pay what you can model. And so that produce distribution has grown to 50 households in Southeast and North Austin, for example. We were able to use our nonprofit infrastructure to pass through what equates to about 45% of our budget, total budget, in direct cash assistance and relief to people. These are community leaders in our network. They're childcare providers. They are critical to the infrastructure of community. And so this wasn't really seen as charity. This was a way of making sure that folks were okay and able to support themselves and each other so that the long-term work toward health equity can continue. But, you know, as many people have said over and over again in the last year, this pandemic has highlighted and deepened the existing inequities that many of us have been living through, talking about, working on for a long time. And the advantage is that I think the people closest to the problems knew what to do, right? So we relied on our institutional partners to make room for us to be able to do that. And we were able to see that in not just, you know, produce distribution and cash assistance, but also a continuation of the work around policy and systems to ensure more health equity.
Definitely, definitely. I've been in awe from afar of the great work that you have been doing with GAVA over there. And I kind of have selfishly have a two-pronged question that I want to ask and follow up if you so be obliged. I know what I really see that you're doing over there in terms of building a resilient community is really giving power back to a community, right? And from what you just said, two things, right? Like bridging that racial wealth divide, giving unrestricted cash transfer back to people, right? And I wonder if you could talk quickly about what that does for people, right? In a way that how we're being, you know, we're cutting the red tape and being unbiased, right? And what does that really allow people to do when you take restrictions away, right? And you stop giving judgment. And then and what it does to be able to like give people knowledge to produce and distribute their own food. So I know that's kind of two separate things, but if you could talk about that quickly.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would point to the hustle and the way that communities have survived and thrived despite a lack of institutional power for a long time, but still have a lot of power. And I think what we're doing is galvanizing power, you know, uniting people and creating more options. So financial resources create options, right? Poor folks pay more for everything. When you have money up front, when you have capital, when you have access to wealth or credit, you can buy the cheaper route, right? You can make the moves to fix the situation for what you need to do. And so by giving unrestricted cash, for example, we know that it didn't just go to the person we routed that money to, right? That person's taking care of a network. That person has to make moves, similar to the produce distribution, right? We're not necessarily selling 50 shares of produce. I said we're serving 50 households. That's because households share, they barter, they trade. I'll get your box this week. Hey, can you get I'm $5 short. Can you get my box this week, right? That's community credit. That's community ecosystems. That's what we have to rely on. And so we were immediately able to see that, yeah, if you could just move the resources to people, they can figure their way out of it. If you're living in Austin and you're working class, you sure know how to use resources effectively. You have to. There's no way to survive in this town, right? Yeah. So we need to trust that and build the relationships to allow the trust to make those moves.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being such an enabler for our community. I want to switch over to Nikenia now and really, you know, pose the same question, because so many of these leaders are doing the same thing, but in very different ways. You know, Nikenia, can you, same question, tell us about your organizations and what's been magnified and what's needed?
So I'm going to do the dance of trying to put forth two different organizations who are near and dear to my heart. As you mentioned, I spent the last couple of years in leadership and then as the executive director of Black Mamas ATX. And the year of the pandemic had tremendous impacts on the women that we serve. When we first started to have cases rise, we saw an influx of women who were becoming fearful of birthing in hospitals. And hospitals, rightfully so, had to change their policies and restrict access. And so we quickly shifted to an environment where women were told that they could only have one support person. So whereas before they could have brought their children with them, or they could have had their partner with them and the doula, they were having to choose between a partner and a doula, and maybe not having the support system, not having an answer for what to do with their older children while they were giving birth. And so that was a challenge. And then we immediately saw an increase in the effects around mental health for our moms who were pregnant, and then those who had children and postpartum. Black women can be as many as 7 times more likely to have postpartum depression. So you add a pandemic on top of that, and the stress of losing jobs and homeschooling, and we're going to talk about resilience. There's a book to be written on the resilience that these women had to muster up to make it through 2020. I'll shift to Houston-Tillotson University. We have made the choice to keep our students, our staff, and our faculty safe, to shift to online learning both the fall and the spring semester. And in order to do that, we took some significant hits financially. And unfortunately, because private HBCUs do not get the same level of funding as public institutions or larger institutions, our fearless leader, Dr. Pierce Burnett, had to make some tough choices, but she managed to preserve the staff that we have. We didn't have to do furloughs or layoffs, but it impacted us in other ways. And unfortunately, we have seen a decrease in enrollment both in the fall and the spring semester, because students are having to make choices about what they can afford, being able to support their families and be present for families where they may have parents that need help. And illness in Black and Brown communities, we are being disproportionately affected in terms of sickness and death, specifically related to COVID. And so I could go on and on, but both of those populations had significant challenges, but we have persevered and we're here.
Thank you for that. I'd be interested to know, I think one of the things that I'm really interested in learning about, and, I hear this similar parallels, for Latinos that are going through, issues of maternal health, and then also going through college right now. Like, what does it look like right now, for you and the dual roles that you straddle, at Houston-Tillotson, also at Black Mamas? Like, when you are posed with issues of mental health for someone who is currently either pregnant or going through school, like, what are some of these mitigating factors? And as somebody who's either providing services, right, either as a nonprofit or an institution of higher learning, right, like, what are some of those touch points, right, virtually right now, that you try to provide someone who's really either trying to expand their family or like hustle to up their career game, to get to that next level right now? Like, what does that look like in this moment?
Absolutely. And I'll start with Black Mamas ATX. We were very fortunate early on in the spring of 2020 to pursue and receive funding for additional mental health support. So what they ended up looking like is we worked with a professor out of Kent State who specifically, her area expertise is Black women and anxiety. And we were able to receive her training and her curriculum and quickly deploy anxiety support groups that were postpartum and prenatal based. In addition to that, we received funding from Altogether ATX and St. David's Foundation to employ a full-time social worker that is providing free therapy, no cost to mom, and case management. So not only are we dealing specifically with mental health, but some of the other stressors that can impact mental health, right? If I'm at risk of being evicted, or if I don't have healthy foods, or all those other things, case management has been able to wrap around those women. Likewise, when we look at the students and how they're being impacted in their mental health, the university has been very fortunate to have staff and we've reached out. We are a small family at Houston-Tillotson. And so while we have people who are designated counselors or mental health liaisons, all of our faculty and staff have personal relationships with our students and have made themselves available. And we are also very fortunate that we have community care that's at the top of our campus as well. So we have made it a point, both organizations, to publicize and make our populations aware of what's available, and to help them to normalize that this is a difficult time and not stigmatize if they're having challenges with their mental health.
Well, I'm very excited for you in your new role, because I think it is it's an amazing time as the Amazons and the Teslas and the other institutions of the world move to Austin, right? They need to be aware that advancement of Austin includes advancement of the institutions that make Austin Austin, and Houston-Tillotson is one of those institutions. And if they're listening, they need to know. So
absolutely, we are I've started to coin it, we are the jewel on Bluebonnet Hill, and we want to be seen as such and invested in likewise.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. I would love to also bring in Raul over into the conversation. And Raul and I have the pleasure of being on the Austin Latino Coalition together. And same question over to you, my friend. What is happening, over at your organization? What are you seeing as being magnified in the community right now, and what's needed?
All right. Thank you, Esteban, and to all of my fellow panelists. Right, just honored to be part of this conversation. Thanks to Impact Austin and all your members and supporters. Again, I've been with CAN now for 5 years, and one of the things sort of CAN is known for is our community indicators report, and I believe that was the link that was shared in the chat. But we have we track 17 different indicators of well-being. And really what COVID taught us is that we already knew what the problems were, and really hadn't acted sufficiently or adequately, right, to address community needs. Because if you look at the concentration of cases, if you look at the calls to 211, right, which areas are the ones calling for assistance? It's the areas with high poverty, high unemployment, low access to health insurance, right? It sounds like a duh sort of a thing now, right? But, when you look at the data and you look at the maps, you're like, wow, those are already the areas that were highlighted in our 2-year-old data, right? Our data is about 2 years old, but you could already have gleaned something about what was coming, right? Or where the needs were going to be the heaviest, right? And if we knew that, where the needs were going to be greatest, well, could we have responded more adequately, right, to those particular neighborhoods? And I'm talking about, Dove Springs, talking about Runberg area, talking about Colony Park. We already knew those are areas of high need, right? So we could have flooded those communities with resources early on, right, and not wait till we see what the pandemic does to those communities. So I do want to call out GAVA, right, for the work it's doing there in the Runberg area in Dove Springs, and they have been on the ground, right, making an impact for a long time, and as have all the groups. But we did recognize GAVA last year with one of our community leadership awards. So I do want to kind of mention that, and had the pleasure of working with Dan, who was on our board, right, representing One Voice, and also our panelists from Black Mamas ATX, who I know I've seen in the CRT calls, and for me, I think that's something that's been very exciting to see the community response, right, and to see groups like Community Resilience Trust, the Austin Latino Coalition, Austin Justice Coalition, the way they've kind of brought folks together to address the community needs, the food response, right? Food access, we've had some great collaborations around food access. Good Works Austin and Keep Austin Together have done a great job of getting cooked meals to families. And so I think that our community is strong and committed, but I do think, what we've learned maybe somewhat through the process, as the nonprofit providers that preceded me can tell you, right? Because we don't do direct service necessarily, but is that it's very difficult when there are these assistance programs to access all of them, because if you're in a state of crisis, it's hard to apply for 2 or 3 different programs for assistance, right? So I think what we've learned is, maybe even through the RISE Fund sort of a approach, right, is how do we get folks the help they need, and they can make the choices for where do I put this funding, right, this assistance that I'm getting, versus I have to apply for food and I have to apply for housing assistance and I have to apply for this other kind of assistance. So I think that's definitely something we've learned, but I think that again, what we've learned is that, we already knew there was disparities in health, right? We already knew there was disparities in life expectancy by race, right? So I think what this suggests to me is, again, we can't, when we go back to quote unquote normal, we can't go back to normal in our response, right? Because there will still be families that are in crisis. It's just right now it's more in your face. So that's why everybody's more interested in helping, but there will still be families in crisis kind of when we get out of this. So let's learn from our experience and our response, so that, again, we can continue to help those families be resilient, because I think one theme across that we heard from every speaker prior to me is these families are resilient, almost out of necessity, they're required to be resilient to provide for their families. So how do we support those families as best as we can? So thank you for that.
Definitely, and for those that might not be as familiar, with the indicators report, I'm wondering, are there any current data in there that really sticks out with you as things that you want people to kind of know about or keep an eye on, as we kind of move into the new year? What are some things that really kind of stick out at you as these are things that people need to be aware of, right? As we move forward, that we need to kind of really, move in one direction or the other.
Well, I think for me, just as a data person, right, when the data screams at you, right, it's these neighborhoods, go support those neighborhoods, right? Dove Springs, Runberg, Colony Park. If you look at, again, the real-time data, not my 2-year-old data, although that data was also suggestive that these areas needed support, right? But now with the COVID data and the 211 calls for assistance, it really is saying, it's calling for a place-based sort of approach, right? Neighborhood-based or geographic-based support versus a need-based approach, right? Those who have this need or those who have that need. So I do think that that's something that data is really screaming, right? In terms of an approach to better addressing, right, the needs of families so that we can help the most as quickly as possible. But I think something that, again, the 2 issues that I think come up a lot in our conversations related to COVID, or the impacts of COVID and the pandemic, that often get glossed over, right? They get mentioned, but because there's so much need in terms of basic needs, right, in terms of health and access to services, is the mental health, right? We have a mental health crisis. We had a mental health crisis before, but almost all of us have been traumatized, right, in some way. So coming out of this, there's going to need to be a lot of healing and a lot of support for individuals and families. And also the domestic violence piece, often, there's references to an increase in challenges in terms of domestic violence. But again, because of all the competing needs and interests out there that families have, right? And it's, those usually, again, for me, don't get enough attention. I think that the data also speaks to a growing need or an increased need to address those issues. But I think those are some that we'll have to keep a focus on, right? Also when we get out of crisis mode and into recovery mode. I think you're muted, Estevan.
It wouldn't be a Zoom, conversation if I wasn't on mute at some point or another. So thank you for that. I'd love for us to get into some group discussion and maybe some storytelling, because I think those things kind of lend themselves to the times. And so if everyone can come on camera, I'd love to pose a question to the group and have everyone kind of chime in if that is as you feel appropriate. But so one of my first questions is, we've talked a lot about what your organization is doing and where you see the touch points are. I think there's another kind of question around, like, what could the system be doing? And there are a lot of pieces to the system, right? There's the government, they're nonprofits at large. I think they're the funders. They're the who are the funders, right? They're these community sponsors. There's other banks, and there's also the work that we do. A lot of us are service providers, but we could be doing more policy and advocacy work. And so my question kind of is, like, should we be doing more policy and advocacy work? Should funders be open to funding more policy and advocacy work? What are the thoughts kind of around that?
I'll hop in on that first and then let my colleagues chime in. But I think, what Black Mamas ATX really tried to do is to do a 360 in terms of the work that we do, because we know that we can create programs until we're blue in the face. But if we don't start addressing the systemic reasons why we need programs, then we'll continue to dump money into short-term solutions. And so while Black Mamas ATS has a robust offering of supports and programs for families, we're also talking to legislators. We're also looking at systems within healthcare and education to get to root causes and to break down a lot of the white supremacist ways in which things have been done that work to the detriment of Black women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think something that we can all do, Esteban, everybody that's watching on this panel, is we need to partner with our HBCUs. We need to partner with our Latino coalitions. We as nonprofits need to come together, and at One Voice, we're doing that. And just because a person in the audience right now doesn't see themselves as part of one of the groups I mentioned, be interested, become a part. We will welcome you into our group to ally with our respective organizations. And we just need people to get outside their comfort zone and to partner and collaborate. And there are powers in numbers. There is power in numbers. And we need to help deliver that power to the underrepresented nonprofits, HBCUs, and the community at large. And the only way to do that is for us to all do it together.
I would say we need a lot of bravery around this issue, and we need bravery from everybody. We all got to be brave together and have each other's backs, because the reality is we as GAVA and many organizations are organizing for community power in an IRS structure designed for charity. We have to recognize the roots of the 501c3 structure and the fact that this is a product of, Reaganomics, basically wealthy people being able to write off contributions to charity. When really we want to go upstream, right? We don't want to be saving babies in the river. We want to change the way things are happening. And so we've had to build strategies and code switch. And our philanthropic partners have to code switch, because they're funding community organizing, but they can't call it community organizing. They're funding policy work, but they can't call it policy work, right? And they'll say, well, can you have a 501c4? But this isn't really about 501c4 electoral politics. This is about culture shift. This is about the transformation of mental models in every single institution that has inherited and perpetuates a white supremacist system. And that affects every human being, no matter what color you are, right? So I think that's where we have the people who are exploiting our community right now, the people who are making fast money in this pandemic are not wasting the crisis. So we cannot waste the opportunity to pull levers and be brave and do things in a different way than we have before, because we don't have time. We're going to exhaust ourselves trying to constantly treat things downstream. And I'll just say the reason we have to be brave, I had to be brave. I wouldn't have been able to do it without my community, my team. But, you know, I always tell people it's all fun and games when you're talking about healthy food and parks and playgrounds and fruits and vegetables. Nobody's going to challenge you on that. When you start talking about people's right to stay in their neighborhood and not be exploited from a real estate perspective, now you're messing with the bag on your nonprofits boards, on your foundation boards. You're talking about where people make their money. So we have to be real about that. We're going to need participation at every single level of society to be brave and figure out a different way to do things.
Yeah, and real quickly, again, not to try to repeat, but because I've mentioned more on an issue specific basis, some of the needs to continue to focus on, right, as we come out of this. But a couple of issues Ken has worked on, and I'm going to put a couple of the resources on the chat, is kind of a focus on language access. We created kind of a language access sort of resource portal that we call We Can ATX. And so, and we kind of launched in 2 languages besides English right now. It's Spanish and Burmese. Because again, if you look at who's most isolated and who finds it most difficult to navigate the system, right? You know, those are some of the most isolated individuals, right, in our community, because they not only have maybe a low to moderate income, but they also have, you know, the language barrier. So this year, again, in addition to getting the information out there, it's, well, how do we engage with these communities? It's not just we translated a bunch of information, right? But how do we engage those communities and make sure that they have access to what they need? And the other one is the Central Texas Racial Equity Collective, is about a group of about 20 groups that kind of formed this collective as a way of, again, pooling our resources, leveraging efforts, and not so much for the collective itself, but to support the folks on the ground who are doing the work that needs to be done, right? Because it's so hard when you're actually on the ground doing the work, and then you have to worry about how do we fundraise so that we can help more families, right? So, so obviously racial equity is an overarching concern, right? Over the, you know, with regard to the pandemic, with regard to disparities, even before the pandemic. So to the extent we can leverage and align, you know, that's, again, we can have a bigger impact if we can do that. But those are a couple of things we've tried to focus on: language access and racial equity, right? And again, trying to create that infrastructure we need, right, to serve these families. And it's not easy, it doesn't happen overnight. And so I did want to share those, you know, some those resources that are kind of emerging.
Definitely. For this next kind of conversation starter, I do kind of want to pointedly start with Carmen and kind of work my way around. We had a kind of a meetup with one another, and we were kind of talking about resiliency and the different things that are like interconnected, and that we don't always talk about them, or maybe are weird touch points and don't get elevated in the right way. And Carmen, I remember you know, we were talking about environmental justice and housing quality, and how like they're both very interconnected with healthcare. And so I'd love an opportunity to kind of come around to each of you, and like, you know, if you could kind of point out in your mind something that's very related to resiliency in our community that doesn't always come to the front of mind. But Carmen, I'd wonder if I could come over to you and have you kind of talk about that point real quickly.
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, one of the big buzzwords along with resilience is the terminology around social determinants of health, which talk about the places that we live, work, learn, worship, right? The places we live and exist, and how those places influence, and also the elements of access that we have to all of these different aspects of our life influence our health outcomes much more than the actual health care that we receive, and actually more even than our genetics. Although I think there's a lot of interrelated stuff that we could dig into more. And so I say that because I did grow up in the environmental justice movement, and you know, the environmental justice movement was where I learned to think about the environments that we live, work, learn, worship, and play in, because that's what the environmental justice movement was all about. It was, the environment isn't just looking at air quality, water quality, CO2, greenhouse gas. It's about the people who are disproportionately impacted from a health standpoint. And it was public health that funded the environmental justice movement when the environmental movement did not. And so that intersection has always been super important to me. And as we talk about resilience, you know, resilience is a buzzword. We had to really break down to have a community conversation that centered the people we were talking about. And we reframed that phrase, community resilience or climate resilience, as response and responsibility. And we started having a conversation about how we as a neighbor, as a family member, as a community, how do we respond and how do we take responsibility for ourselves and each other in our health, in times of crisis, et cetera. And that's everything from like not speeding down your neighborhood streets, right? To cleaning out your gutters or making sure your apartment is taking care of stuff the way they need to, right? And then how do the institutions, how does the city respond? How does the city take responsibility for an inequitable past, right? And so when we start talking about response and responsibility, people can have that conversation. They can populate it with context. And we just got to learn to speak multiple languages, right? It's not just English and Spanish and the 50 other languages we have here. It's real life and institutional power speak, right? And so that's, I think, where those intersections, though, at the end of the day, you get the engineers out of their office and into the neighborhood, they can see it from the lived experience perspective a little better. And that's how we're trying to reframe stuff.
I want to, something that's been on my heart, man, I just love Carmen's words and look forward to talking to her later. It's very deep and I love that. You know, one thing that's been on my heart is, we've gone through a couple of iterations in our world. Maybe the 80s was one of them, where the term self-help was really, really big. And there's been a couple of iterations of this terminology of self-help. What I want to say is I think what the pandemic and these times have taught us, and Raul alluded to this in the mental health piece, is that it's not about self-help anymore. It's about reaching out to others and helping them. That's why we at Seedling invest in mentoring children who have an incarcerated parent, because mentoring is known to be a mitigator of the effects of the adverse childhood experience of parental incarceration. And what I want to say to everyone is getting outside your comfort zone is important, and we need to help build resilience by making the power of two and then multiplying that into more by serving and loving one another. If we are able to serve and love one another, we have all realized we have very little control, and that because the pandemic showed us that. And self-help is good to take care of yourself, but we must serve one another and do it proactively.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, not to kind of repeat, but I do want to, again, just note that, again, a lot of the solutions were already, we were already talked about, well, we need universal health care. Well, we don't have it. And so this is a result. You know, we advocate for a living wage, you know, in the city of Austin, and the county have adopted it. But if we had a living wage across the board, right, would we be in as bad of a shape as we are now, right? Food access, no one should struggle to have food, right, for their family. You know what I mean? It's like, so some of this is just about, again, making sure we're taking care of the least of us, right? The most vulnerable. Everyone has a right to a roof over their head, food, quality education, right? Again, why do we defund these things, right? When they're the most basic things families need. And so I think coming out of this, hopefully we all have a commitment to make sure that these things are universally available, right? You know, they're not privileges, right? They're rights that we all have as human beings, and we should all, I think, advocate for those who don't have what we have. You know, we may be comfortable for whatever reason, you know, by the grace of God, but we can do something, as Dan suggested, to help those who are in a different situation. So I do thank Dan for kind of bringing in that element.
Definitely. Thank you for that. You know, I think I might shake it up real quickly here as we go into the home stretch, Nakinia. I wonder, and I hope this isn't putting you on the spot, but I wonder, but I know you can take it. Yeah, you have a lot of great and amazing experience, and I wonder if there might be a story of either kind of like an individual or a family that you've worked with during this time that kind of highlights, you know, just like the amazing work that nonprofit and just like communities and cultures of caring can and how transformative it's really been during a time like this?
So I'm actually going to pull from another organization that is very grassroots that I've had the privilege of leading. About a year and a half ago, before all of this kind of popped off, almost 2 years now this summer, I started a Facebook group. And at the time I was working through postpartum anxiety and depression. I was contracting but not working full time. And I just needed to expand my village. So I created a Black Austin Mamas Facebook group. And I just invited my girlfriends, and then they invited their girlfriends. And now, a year and a half later, it's over 2,000 women. And during the pandemic, we literally were able to mobilize. We don't have a 501c3. We don't, have a governing board. We were able to mobilize women. We had a mom who contracted COVID, her and her 2-week-old baby and her husband with no family in town. And we raised over $1,500 within 2 days to make sure that they were taken care of. Then we had someone in the group who was a nurse practitioner who came in and checked in on them because they were only getting telehealth appointments and sterilized their home. And during that same time, we were able to, I think 18 families got Christmas gifts, their entire Christmas covered. And this wasn't any corporations or anybody in particular. This is women who would go into their purse and cash out $5 or $50. And so I think what my takeaway, or what I would like for people to take away, is that you don't have to wait for a foundation or to have $1 million. Community is all around us. And all we have to do is reach out and take the gifts that God has given us and plant somewhere and do good work. And everybody can do that, regardless of who you are.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. I think, and I think that just goes to show, I think the couple questions in the chat of how people can get involved. I know, Carmen, your organization is always looking for volunteers or people or donation dollars, as all of your organizations are. So I'm saying, if people want to get involved, please reach out to any of these panelists here. They're definitely willing to either have you as a mentor for their organization. They're going to get you involved with different programming that they have available. They're willing to take your donations. They can help point you in the right direction. So there is a wealth of knowledge. They will definitely put their email addresses in the chat, and they will get you plugged in. And so I will say, go to them first. Also, I know that Impact Austin is an amazing resource and can definitely get you plugged in. And they're an amazing collective too. They're a collective giving organization. Your impact dollars, can be exponentially amplified, right, through a collective giving organization. I, have the honor of being able to manage a collective giving organization over at the Austin Community Foundation, and I know, just the power that can happen through an organization like that. So please know that you're in good hands over at Impact Austin. So I'm going to once again thank the amazing leadership and expertise of this amazing panel. It has been a joy and an honor and a privilege. I also would be remiss if I did not thank Nicole over at Impact Austin for all of your help in putting this together. But last but not least, and moreover, Ann Nelson, who has been my kind of co-leader in putting this all together. Can you come off of your shadow background for a second? I want you to wave to everyone because you have been a rock star. Thank you so much for all of your help in putting this together. And I'm going to hand things back over to Margaret.
Well, thank you so much, Estevan, and thank you so much to all of our panelists today. And what a wonderful sentiment to end on. The community is all around us. Plant it somewhere and it will do good, and let it do good. That is just such wonderful parting thoughts. If you've If what you've heard today has compelled you to dive deeper into community investment, I invite you to visit the Impact Austin website or reach out to an Impact Austin member to learn more. I want to thank our Impact Austin member and Discovery Days coordinator, Ann Nelson, and just reiterate Estevan's thank you. She really has worked tirelessly over the last few weeks to help to facilitate and bring this session together. And what a wonderful session that it was. I'd also like to invite everyone back to join us next Tuesday, February 2nd, for another informative Discovery Days session. The session is all about learning how you can increase your membership impact. And next Friday, February 5th, we will have a panel discussion about corporate social responsibility with corporate leaders from across our community. Thanks again, everyone, for sharing your time with us today. And we hope to see you at another Impact Austin event in the very near future. Thanks, guys.